Mr. Bevin, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. It's great to be here. It really is. Thank you.
So we'll start with workforce. The Chamber just released a workforce report that showed that there's a lot of problems within the workforce system in the state currently, and among the recommendations was that the next governor do a top-to-bottom review of the system, including bringing in an outside entity to help conduct the review before they even finalize cabinet structure of the administration. How do you feel about that recommendation, and how would you handle that type of review?
I think it's a good recommendation. Specifically how that gets accomplished will be dependent on who wins and what their thought is on it. But I have called, if people look at mattbevin.com, look at my blueprint for a better Kentucky, I call repeatedly for outside audits, reviews, because I frankly think the best way to make progress is to open the books and for people to know what it is that we're dealing with. So I applaud the Chamber for bringing that recommendation forward. I think it would behoove whoever the next governor is to take it seriously and to look very closely at a thorough analysis of things before you start trying to build a new administration.
Perfect. Now, another one of the recommendations within the report was that a lot of the employers see that there's not a lot of skills, especially soft skills, so interview skills, being able to communicate, or even showing up to work on time. That's a big skills gap. What can be done currently to kind of improve the workforce system and make sure that Kentuckians are prepared for the jobs that are currently available and the jobs of the future?
There's several parts to that. I mean, obviously, some of it starts at home, literally. I mean, how you're raised and how you're expected to interact with other people. Some children have an advantage there because they come from stable homes, others don't. And so how then do you help them to bridge the gap? It also includes things like education itself, intentional, specific education, where we allocate the dollars. If we want certain degrees, if we want certain outcomes, if we want certain graduation rates, we need to incent those. And that's where I'm in very like mind with the Chamber as it relates to outcomes-based funding. I think we need to be smarter and more intentional with where we allocate the finite number of dollars that we have. But specifically back to some of those softer skills, that's education as well. And frankly, for some of those who have the most difficulty streamlining into the workforce, they're folks who maybe have been dependent on the system through their own, as a result of their own decisions or otherwise, they have found themselves caught up in a system where they've not been a part of the workforce. How do we help them to assimilate, to mainstream themselves in? Frankly, demanding of people. But by demanding, giving them opportunity to learn some of these interview skills. Make that a requirement. If you're going to be a recipient of certain programs, we're going to give you the opportunity and the requirement to learn how to interview, to learn how to dress, to learn how to make eye contact, to learn how to be timely, whatever the case might be. None of this is rocket science. But for those for whom they're not getting it in a home environment or whatever the case might be, let us as a state use the resources we have to ensure that when they do apply for the workforce, that more and more of them are work ready.
Now, along the same lines, your blueprint plan has some things about job creation. So tell us a little bit about what you would do to create jobs in the state if you were elected governor.
Sure. I mean, there are several things. There's 7 key planks to this blueprint for a better Kentucky. And they are seemingly very disparate from one another. They address things like passing right-to-work legislation. They address things like education and health care and pension reform. They talk about the size of state government and the need, frankly, to minimize that to a degree and to be more efficient with it. I talk about things, for example, like the overreach by the federal government. Now, all these things seemingly are disparate from one another. They seemingly are unrelated, but they're all very specifically tied to your point, which is how do we create jobs? All of these things in combination will create a wider economic basis. And this is what I have been focused on. I am a job creator. I've spent decades in the private sector creating jobs. I own all or part of 10 different companies. So this is not something that's hypothetical to me. It's not something where I read other people's sound bites. The businesses that I own are regulated by everybody from OSHA to the EPA to the SEC to the FDA. And so at every turn, I wrestle with the very same things that so many of your members wrestle with at the Chamber. And I'm very not only sympathetic but empathetic because I've walked in those shoes. So meeting payroll and helping those that are meeting payroll is something that the next governor needs to be very focused on.